How do you forgive someone who has shattered your heart and crushed it underfoot? Someone who has tainted what should have been a joyous occasion with utter misery? How do you erase the memory of someone who has obliterated your ability to love? Hildegard and Greg crossed paths in their senior year of high school. Both were residents of the Blackwood Home for Orphans, but they hadn't taken notice of each other until then. Greg wasn't particularly interested in girls at that stage. His primary focus, shared by Hildy, was on education and securing admission to Purdue University. Life was challenging for orphans, and they knew that to achieve academic success, they had to work diligently. Greg was fully dedicated to shaping his future. He first noticed Hildy at the chess club and later at future engineers' meetings. They naturally gravitated towards each other, bonding as best friends. It was only natural, considering they were the only orphans in those clubs. Eventually, they became inseparable, sharing everything from studying to leisure activities like watching TV. They even attended prom together, albeit platonically. Their social lives revolved around each other, and Hildy felt it would be a shame for them to miss prom, so they decided to go together. They enjoyed themselves thoroughly, attending an after-party where Hildy, in a moment of abandon, kissed him, jesting about the expectations of prom. Greg brushed it off, likening it to kissing a sibling, and they shared a laugh before heading back to Blackwood. Both of them secured admission to Purdue with scholarships and loans, pursuing engineering degrees. They would have roomed together if the college allowed it, but fortunately, they were assigned different roommates. Hildy's roommate turned out to be Piper. After Greg settled into his room, he sought out Hildy and encountered Piper. Time seemed to stand still as his blue eyes met hers, experiencing a sensation akin to being struck by lightning. Greg had never believed in such things until that moment when he and Piper were thunderstruck. She became his first and only love. They formed a tight-knit trio, with Hildy, Piper, and Greg spending much of their time together. While Hildy and Greg focused on their engineering studies, socially, they were inseparable from Piper. Except for the occasions when Piper and Greg went out on dates or had private moments in his dorm room when his roommate was absent. Tragedy struck during their junior year when Piper, previously the only one with a family, became an orphan after her parents died in a plane crash. Hildy and Greg provided solace and support, embracing Piper as their own family. College flew by, and both Hildy and Greg graduated, landing positions at a prominent firm in Atlanta. By the time they graduated, Greg and Piper were engaged, marrying at City Hall a week later with Hildy serving as the best man. They embarked on their honeymoon journey to Atlanta, with Hildy taking on the role of their chauffeur. In Atlanta, life continued to improve for Greg, Piper, and Hildy. Piper secured a position at the same firm where Greg and Hildy worked, bolstering their combined incomes and enabling them to purchase a house instead of renting. The three of them formed a loving household. Concerned about Hildy's solitude, Piper introduced her to Jamie, a colleague from work. While Hildy didn't initially show much interest in Jamie, Greg sensed her longing for the happiness he and Piper shared and believed she gave it a chance. After 6 months of dating, Hildy decided to move in with Jamie. Though Jamie appeared enamored, Greg felt that Hildy's feelings were more subdued. For 4 blissful years, Piper and Greg thrived in their careers and found contentment at home. Then, their joy multiplied when Piper surprised Greg with news of her pregnancy. The household erupted in celebration, toasting to Piper, the baby, Greg's contribution, and everything else they could think of. Hildy and Jamie discreetly stepped aside, allowing Piper and Greg to revel in the moment. 9 months passed in a haze of love and anticipation. Dr. Brown, Piper's obstetrician, reassured them at each appointment, confirming a smooth pregnancy and their good health. Hildy and Greg doted on Piper, embracing the impending arrival with excitement. True to Dr. Brown's assurances, the delivery was swift and uncomplicated. Greg stood by Piper's side in the delivery room, holding her hand, while Hildy anxiously awaited outside. Their daughter, Amy, arrived with ease, though Greg's concern arose when he noticed a red mark on her hand. Seeking reassurance from the doctor, Greg was relieved to learn that it was nothing to worry about. Once settled in Piper's room, Hildy joined the new parents, admiring Piper cradling their newborn daughter. Greg proudly introduced Amy to Hildy, only for Hildy to exclaim in shock at the sight of Amy's brown eyes. Greg's world ground to a halt as he realized the implications. According to the laws of biology, two blue-eyed parents cannot have a brown-eyed child. In a whispered accusation, Hildy confronted Greg, suggesting infidelity on Piper's part. In a whirlwind of emotions, Greg handed the baby to Piper and stormed out of the room. He sought answers from the maternity nurse, questioning whether a baby's dark brown eyes could eventually turn blue. Disheartened by her response, confirming the unlikely possibility, Greg returned to Piper's room, consumed by anger and suspicion. Confronting Piper, Greg demanded to know the identity of the baby's father, accusing her of infidelity. Piper, visibly distressed, denied any wrongdoing, insisting that Greg was the only one she had been with. As emotions escalated, both Piper and the baby cried in distress. Greg's frustration boiled over as he insisted on the impossibility of the situation, pointing out the distinctive red mark he had witnessed at birth. Despite his outburst, the nurse intervened, urging them to calm down or leave. Feeling betrayed and devastated, Greg stormed out, leaving behind a pleading Piper. Blinded by tears, he stumbled into a wall, only to be guided to the elevator by Hildy. Taking charge, Hildy drove Greg home, determined to support him through the turmoil. Arriving home, Greg hastily packed his belongings, fueled by a mix of anger and heartache. Meanwhile, Hildy returned with her own luggage, declaring her intention to accompany him. Greg questioned her decision, considering her commitments, but Hildy remained resolute. Addressing Greg's concerns, Hildy assured him of her determination to stand by him, regardless of the challenges ahead. With resolve in her voice, she dismissed his protests and joined him in packing, preparing for their uncertain journey together. "I left Jamie a note, explaining that he could have everything and decide whether to keep or donate it," Hildy said, meeting Greg's gaze. "I apologized, but I had to move forward." Greg nodded, acknowledging that he would have felt the loss if Hildy hadn't joined him. Loading up their pickup, they departed, resigning from their jobs on the go. Piper's emotional turmoil escalated into uncontrollable crying and screaming. Convinced that the baby couldn't be hers, she faced disbelief from the nurses, leading to her transfer to the psych ward and sedation. Greg never returned, leaving Piper bewildered as she struggled to comprehend the situation. Learning of his departure, Piper contacted Jamie, who revealed that Hildy and Greg had left without a trace. Crushed, Jamie realized that his plans for proposing to Hildy were shattered. Plunged into a deep depression, Piper grappled with confusion and self-doubt, uncertain about the events that had transpired. Isolated and abandoned, she faced financial strain and the loss of her support system. Dr. Brown stepped in to assist Piper, facilitating the adoption of Amy and ensuring the upkeep of her home. With his guidance, Piper began to rebuild her life, finding solace and support in his care until she was ready to move forward. Dr. Brown, now insisting on being called Pat, was significantly older than Piper, but he was kind and attentive to her needs. He refused to accept any rent or financial assistance, becoming Piper's primary support system. For the first 2 months, Piper struggled to find motivation to get out of bed, but Pat encouraged her to tend to the garden, which gradually helped her regain a sense of purpose. Over time, Piper and Pat developed a close relationship, and within 6 months, they became a couple. Although Piper didn't love him and had lost faith in love after Greg's betrayal, she appreciated Pat's kindness and companionship. Despite Pat's physical limitations, Piper found comfort in their relationship, valuing the stability and care he provided. Pat surprised Piper with a 2-month vacation to Alaska, during which he arranged for a divorce from Greg. Alaska's lenient divorce laws allowed for a quick resolution, and Pat proposed to marry Piper as soon as the divorce was finalized. Although Piper was initially surprised by the speed of Pat's actions, she ultimately agreed to marry him, feeling resigned to her circumstances. Meanwhile, Greg and Hildy relocated to Detroit, where they found employment at the same engineering firm. Adjusting to their new life, Hildy remained devoted to Greg, ensuring that he never slept alone as she worried about his well-being. Their relationship was purely platonic, with Hildy committed to supporting Greg emotionally through their transition to a new city. Greg was still grappling with his emotional turmoil, unable to trust or open himself up to any romantic involvement. Every night, he and Hildy maintained their physical distance in bed, but somehow, they always ended up spooning by morning. Initially awkward, this closeness gradually became routine for them. However, nearly a year into their arrangement, Greg's pent-up desires reached a breaking point when he woke up to Hildy holding his erection. In a moment of passion, they engaged in intense sexual activity, driven purely by physical urges. For Hildy, it was a fulfillment of long-held desires, but for Greg, it left him feeling ashamed and apologetic, regretting his actions and their implications. Despite Greg's attempts to keep their relationship platonic after their encounter, Hildy remained determined to stay close to him, refusing to sleep apart. Greg struggled with guilt and conflict, unable to reciprocate Hildy's desires for intimacy due to his lingering feelings of betrayal from his past relationship with Piper. When Hildy discovered she was pregnant, she proposed marriage to Greg for the sake of their child. Reluctantly, Greg agreed, but their physical relationship remained strained. Although Hildy hoped their daughter's birth would heal Greg's emotional wounds, he continued to struggle with his unresolved feelings towards Piper and their past experiences together. Meanwhile, Piper found herself caught in a moment of drunken recklessness with her husband and a younger doctor, reminiscing about her college experiences with ecstasy as she indulged in newfound excitement and freedom. She struggled to find the right words to express her objections when her husband suggested, "Come on, Piper. We know you enjoy a bit of excitement now and then. Just relax and have fun, darling." Shocked by his words, Piper grappled with the implications. Did her husband believe she had cheated on Greg? Despite her assurances to the contrary, it seemed he never truly believed her, yet he still chose to marry her. Her husband then guided her hands to the bulge in the young doctor's pants, urging her to indulge in the moment. Feeling a surge of defiance, she decided to seize some pleasure from this life and marriage. With determination, she undid the doctor's belt, unzipped his pants, and faced the challenge of accommodating the largest penis she had encountered so far. Meanwhile, Althea had become the center of Greg's world. He showered her with affection, cherishing every moment spent with his daughter as she blossomed into a beautiful young woman. Although Hildy also loved her daughter, she couldn't help but feel a sense of resentment despite her love. Greg's attitude towards her remained unchanged. They were friends, nothing more. While they maintained a physical relationship, Hildy longed for more intimacy, but Greg seemed incapable of reciprocating the romantic love she desired. This realization left her feeling empty and unfulfilled, like a mere object of physical desire rather than a cherished partner. Amidst her bouts of tears and emotional turmoil, Hildy confided in her daughter about her unrequited love for Greg. She explained how she had hoped their friendship would evolve into something more, but it never did. Despite her deep love for Greg, their relationship felt hollow and meaningless, leaving her heartbroken. As they cried together, Piper reassured her daughter that Greg's inability to reciprocate her love wasn't his fault. She reminded her daughter that love doesn't always follow a logical path and that sometimes, despite our deepest desires, things don't turn out the way we hope. When Hildy received the devastating diagnosis of stage 4 ovarian cancer, it was already too late. She had overlooked the warning signs, and by the time she sought medical attention, the disease had progressed beyond treatment. Her daughter took care of her during her final days, and her husband finally offered comfort by holding her hand, but it was an effort too belated. Hildy passed away peacefully one night, leaving Althea grieving for her mother and Greg mourning the loss of his closest companion. Meanwhile, Piper discovered a shocking truth about Dr. Brown. He harbored voyeuristic fantasies of being cuckolded and enjoyed witnessing his wife being shared and exploited by other men. Yet, Piper found herself desensitized to it all, questioning the significance of it in the grand scheme of things. She allowed her husband to indulge in his fantasies while seeking her own forms of pleasure in return. Under Dr. Brown's influence, Piper delved into a world of hedonism and debauchery. She frequented clubs where she was shared among multiple partners, engaging in various sexual acts with reckless abandon. Her experiences ranged from being whipped while suspended naked in chains to participating in orgies and gangbangs. She experimented with drugs to enhance her experiences, fully embracing the lifestyle her husband facilitated. He recorded her escapades, sharing the footage with like-minded individuals for their enjoyment. In a bid to fulfill her husband's desires, Piper even worked in a brothel during her pregnancies, as Dr. Brown had discovered a demand for pregnant women among his clientele. The brothel madam offered generous compensation for Piper's services, and she willingly complied, finding excitement in the taboo nature of her work. With each pregnancy, she adorned herself with tattoos and piercings at the insistence of her lovers, symbolizing her embrace of a libertine identity. Despite her involvement in such extreme experiences, Piper made a conscious decision to forego motherhood. Each child she bore was given up for adoption, preserving her lifestyle without the burden of maternal responsibilities. Although all her daughters shared her blue eyes, she refrained from forming maternal bonds with them, maintaining a detached stance in her pursuit of pleasure and gratification. As a high school senior tasked with creating a family tree for her biology class, Althea knew that her parents were both orphans without any known relatives. Curious and resourceful, she decided to explore her ancestry by utilizing a DNA testing service to uncover any hidden family connections. To her surprise, the results revealed previously unknown relatives. Excited by this discovery, Althea approached her father with the news. However, Greg initially dismissed the possibility, stating that he had no other children besides Althea. Despite his resistance, Althea insisted that the DNA results were accurate, prompting Greg to reluctantly share the story of his first marriage and its end, a tale Althea had never heard before. As Althea pointed out the paternity match between Greg and Amy, a girl seeking her birth parents, Greg became frustrated, citing the difference in eye color between Amy and his known daughter as evidence against the possibility. Hurt by her father's outburst, Althea briefly withdrew before returning to confront him with newfound information about eye genetics. Explaining that two people with blue-eye genes cannot have a brown-eyed child, Althea hugged her father tightly, offering him comfort and understanding. She elucidated that blue eyes can result from a damaged or defective melanin gene, which can also lead to the appearance of brown eyes. Greg, visibly moved by his daughter's compassion and insight, began to reconsider his previous assumptions. In a moment of profound reflection, Greg realized that the pain he had experienced was not solely inflicted by Piper, but also by his own actions towards her, Hildy, and Jamie. Overwhelmed by remorse, he broke down in tears, finding solace in Althea's embrace as they navigated the complexities of forgiveness and self-awareness together. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos.